2024, an election year like no other. From the candidates to the issues, from voter integrity and analysis, we'll discuss debates, trends, patterns, election laws, and more. This is Vote 2024, Path to the Polls.
Bruce, you up?
Schools have become a political battleground. There are pushes to ban books, efforts to shape the lessons our children are taught. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has played a big role in local school board races. In past elections, he backed candidates, all of whom were Republican. He continues to back efforts to ban what he calls woke ideas in classrooms. Now, after more than 20 years, there is a push to place party labels on school board candidates. For more than 2 decades, those school board races were nonpartisan. Amendment 1 is on the November ballot. If passed, it would again provide for the partisan election of members of district school boards. Opponents of the measure say they worry that if passed, the amendment will further politicize education. Those in favor see it as a chance to choose candidates better aligned with their values. Welcome to Path to the Polls. I'm Bruce Hamilton. Joining me, my friend, political analyst Daniel Cronrath, who also brings a unique perspective to this argument because he's an educator. Good to have you back with us.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for having me again.
My pleasure. So, Amendment 1, if 60% of voters support the measure, it returns Florida to a time when school board candidates run under party labels. The sponsor of the bill, State Representative Spencer Roach, a Republican from north of Fort Myers, says it's not about advancing the prospects of Republicans or Democrats. He says if this becomes law in some red counties, it's going to mean that more Republicans get elected, and in some blue counties, it's going to certainly mean more Democrats get elected. My intention in filing the bill was not to put an advantage for one political party over another. Rather, I would say my intention is transparency. True intention here?
Well, I mean, I don't know if that intention is true or not, but certainly the logic is flawed. First of all, there are far more red counties right now in Florida than what there are blue counties, and all of these red counties have school boards. So to go back and to basically go and you know what? Remember, it was in 1998 that the Constitution Revision Commission here in Florida put this on the ballot for Floridians to decide whether or not they wanted to have partisan school board races or they wanted to have them be nonpartisan. We overwhelmingly voted at that time as a state that we wanted local school board races to be decided without the partisan frame of having to know who a Republican was or having to know who the Democrat was. Because at the end of the day, we all want our local school boards to be making the decisions which are best for our children, regardless of their Republicans or regardless of their Democrats. So I do think that this is a move to definitely politicize local races. I think it's a move to make it easier for individuals to go into the ballot box, not have to do research, which I find to be, very unfortunate. One of the things, if you are a thoughtful voter without having those party labels, is, imagine this for a second, having to look up and find what these individuals thought were the key things and do research as the voter. Now we can just do what we do with all of the other races, Bruce, in the last 20 years. We can just go in, we can look for the party label behind the candidate's name. And let's be quite frank about this. The issues which are taking place at the federal level, which may lead you to vote Democrat or Republican, depending upon who that candidate is, they're non-existent at the local level. They're really, really fabricated when you try to draw in national issues and then ascribe them to a local school board candidate who's just trying to run for office. You know, most people who run for school board, this is like something I tell you, the #1 on-ramp for people running for public office in the United States, in all 50 states, are school board races. Most of them wanting to get involved because they care about the future of their children, and they basically want to be an advocate for their child. And it's really interesting, a lot of these individuals, when they get on the school board, as soon as their child is out of school age, they no longer want to serve in the public office because they were motivated just to help their child.
They don't have as much of a vested interest.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They don't have the vested interest any longer to really remain engaged. So, to my way of thinking, I wish that school board races were apolitical. That obviously there's going to be hot button issues in terms of what kind of books you want to have in the classroom, how do you want your school day structured, a whole variety of things. Where do you want to prioritize capital funding within a school district? How do you want to evaluate those special needs within the district in order to take care of it? But to assign partisan labels, I find it unfortunate.
Yeah, and I worry because I remember when I was a kid, we used to go in, when my parents voted, you went behind a curtain and there was a lever you flicked, and a lot of the people voted, Democrat or Republican, you just flip the lever just right down the row, and I think people are worried that that's what's going to happen here, and I think that's what you're alluding to.
Yeah, I think I could be wrong on this, the viewers. I think it was called an Indiana column vote. style ballot. You and I, you grew up in Pennsylvania, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and you're Floridian. I don't think Florida's ever used this.
Right.
But you could literally go in and have a ballot 5 pages long and just clip the top where it said Democrat, and the thing would autofill and you'd be done voting in like 2 seconds, okay? And that's kind of what you're exactly talking about. It's going back to that time where you don't have to do any research. You can just look for your party label. Now in Florida, we don't make it that easy where you hit a button on a computer screen to vote all Republican or all Democrat. But it lends the question, Bruce, if you had that option in Florida, how many people
would you do it?
A lot of people would. A lot of people would in both parties.
And it's sad because a lot of people don't research what the candidates stand for anyway, but that's a whole other argument. So let's look at the other side of the argument here. Opponents of the measure say they worry that if passed, the amendment will further politicize education, which is what we're talking about. They argue without partisan school board elections, there can be healthy debate, healthy discussion, that with its implementation, people will be pressured to vote based on party affiliation. And I think that that's a valid argument.
Well, no, I think it is too. I mean, you know, just to continue our conversation, you know, you really do want at the local level these decisions which are being decided on by local school boards are very, very important to our way of life, but they're not also always necessarily, you know, consistent with what's going on at the national level of your political party. If you are a parent, if you are a taxpayer, let's be honest about this. Education in the United States, I find this actually unfortunate. However, education in the United States is funded by property taxes. So even individuals who don't have children in school, who never have a child, probably their number one, outside of their federal income tax, their number one tax liability is paying property taxes. Property taxes that then go to the local schools, okay? Those decisions in terms of how you want your local schools to be invested in, where you want them to be built, how you want to prioritize the renovation, where you have shrinking populations, like if you think about Duval County, where do we have shrinking populations? Where do we have growing populations, particularly in the suburbs in St. Johns County? Where we're going to be allocating those resources, Bruce, should be nonpartisan. I mean, this should just be, where are we investing in our schools to provide the best quality public education? How are we changing our pedagogies in the classroom in order to best serve the needs of our students? And then this is where you could get into a little bit of the political separation too. I know a lot of folks out there who are more conservative or Republican, they don't feel the obligation to provide a lot of the social services in the schoolroom that a lot of people who are Democrats or more liberal or progressive do. From my point of view, if you've spent any time volunteering in a local public elementary school, if you've gone to some of our inner city elementary schools, it is very hard to teach a child mathematics when a child is hungry. Okay, so the whole idea of being able to provide at least a basic school lunch or some sort of nourishment for that child when they're there, to me seems like something which is both moral and constructive, because then they're not battling their hunger while they're trying to battle basic math. Okay, but there are a lot of people who feel against that, and they believe that that responsibility to take care of the child belongs to the parents and belongs to the home, and that that's not a burden to the taxpayer. So I guess in that way you could say that there's an ideological conversation taking place, but still, why does that need to be a partisan conversation?
Right. Wasn't there a whole issue about funding for school breakfast and things like that made national headlines because of some moves that Governor DeSantis made? And let me talk about that, because Florida has been in the national spotlight because of some moves made by the governor. Let me back up a bit here. July 19th, Governor DeSantis formally endorsed 23 candidates for what are now Florida's nonpartisan school board races. DeSantis said, for the election that is going on today, and let's talk about the fact that today is primary day when we're doing this show, he said, I'm happy to endorse this slate of school board candidates who have pledged to serve with a focus on student success, parental rights, and curriculum transparency. We want the best for our children, and I'm confident all 23 candidates will build upon the success we've had here in Florida. Isn't there a contradiction in what he's saying? Politics or student success? What agenda is the governor promoting, and at what cost? His agenda.
Right. I think that he's commingling the two, because in his mind, student success has a political outcome which favors the governor's designs. Okay. It's very, very interesting when you look at the governor's standpoint with public education. When he comes to Jacksonville, Bruce, you'll notice that he always does press conferences regarding education at some of Jacksonville's most notable charter schools. Interesting to note that when these charter schools were recently graded, the last one that he was at, and I won't mention the name, that's immaterial, is a C-rated school, when there are A-rated public schools just down the road from where Governor Governor DeSantis is visiting. So he's definitely had an agenda, which includes, as you're suggesting, now the support of Amendment 1, but also obviously the support of charter schools over our traditional public schools, which many people in Duval County now, Bruce, are feeling the pinch. If you live out at the beaches like both you and I do, with the threats to Seabreeze Elementary School, to Atlantic Beach Elementary School, a lot of people who had previously been supporting charter schools and have seen the increase in charter school enrollment are now terrified because they may lose their neighborhood walk-to school that has been an effective public school here in Duval County for a very long time. But let's make no bones about it. This has been a priority of Governor DeSantis. The other thing that made national headlines too, and I think with the Democratic National Convention going on right now, this is one of the big attributes that people have been attributing to Governor Walz of Minnesota, okay? Literally imposing not just a school lunch, but a school breakfast for every child in Minnesota under the age of 5. Now, a lot of people who are conservatively ideological would be like, well, how do we fund this? But for the people of Minnesota, and if you were to listen to Governor Walz, his attitude is, how do we not fund this? How do we have childhood hunger and poverty in the state of Minnesota and then expect these children to perform well in school? So it's really an interesting juxtaposition when you look at it. A lot of people will claim that this kind of an issue is very much a left issue, but I got to tell you, Bruce, when you look at the polling, having hungry children is something that, not wanting to have hungry children in school is something that a lot of Republicans support as well. It's a very populist piece of legislation.
So what you're saying is they're not mutually exclusive?
They're not mutually exclusive, that's correct.
All right, so the field of 23 includes 3 candidates in Duval County: Tony Ricardo, Becky Nathanson, and Melody Bolduc. He did not endorse Reggie Blunt, who has the support of the local Republican Party. So my question is, doesn't that all of a sudden make these, quote, nonpartisan races partisan without the benefit of the input of the voters on Amendment 1?
Sure. I agree with you. I also think that it's unfortunate that in nonpartisan races that the governor is actually making endorsements. And I think the other thing, and this is something else, let's just take this one step further. Right now, the other set of races that we have statewide in Florida is the elections for circuit court judge. They do not use partisan labels either. They are nonpartisan races. What if Governor DeSantis were to come out and start actually recommending and endorsing individuals running for the judicial system here? That's supposed to be, in Florida, unlike the federal level, we enjoy the right in Florida that we get to elect our circuit court judges, our appellate court judges, and then we also get the ability to retain Supreme Court justices in Florida after the gubernatorial appointment, okay? What if the governor were to come out and just start saying, this is my person for the judiciary. This is the person who I want to be judged. Then you're taking another core element of the Florida Constitution, the nonpartisan nature of our judicial branch, and you're making it political.
Doesn't Donald Trump do that with the Supreme Court?
Well, he does, of course, but at the federal level, it's very, very different. I mean, that's the way the framers of our Constitution set this up, is that the federal Supreme Court is nominated by the president and confirmed by the United States Senate. In Florida, we enjoy the actual ability to choose who we want to be on our judiciary. It's supposed to be nonpartisan. And so for me, this is very, very akin to what's going on with our school board. We made the decision in 1998 that we didn't want these races to be political. We wanted them to be apartisan in terms of their nature, and now the governor's weighing in. Will he eventually weigh into the judiciary and just say, you know, I don't have the constitutional ability like the President of the United States to appoint members to the U.S. District Court, to the U.S. Appellate Court. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go ahead and endorse people anyway so that I can signal to Republican voters out there who I want to be. And by the way, you know that this is the way that we would do this program. I would be just as angry about this if the Democrats were doing the exact same thing.
Absolutely.
It's a politicization of something that Floridians have not wanted to have politicized. In this particular case, it happened to be Governor DeSantis. But again, I would be just as alarmed about this if it was occurring on the other side.
So is essentially Governor DeSantis overstepping his bounds?
Well, not legally, for sure. I mean, there's nothing here to prevent him from doing this. Yeah, I mean, that's subjective. That's subjective. Yeah, I mean, I would say that I'm objective to it. I don't know if I would rise to the level of something which I consider to be immoral. I would just definitely say it's something very, very political, and it's something that I don't like in terms of our public discourse.
As an educator, do you think?
Yeah, well, and also too, as somebody who follows politics, I mean, I think it's kind of a direct affront on what Floridians have chosen to have as our system. And by the way, to your point, this is why this is an important vote, Amendment 1, coming this November. You know, it's going to take 60% in order to overturn this. Remember, we changed that in 1998 to require the threshold from 50% to a supermajority of 60%. So it'll be interesting to see whether Floridians come out, whether they agree with the president. By the way, let's also talk about this for a second, Bruce, to tie this all in. With the resurgence of the Kamala Harris campaign, and with Harris now replacing President Biden, there will be more Democrats showing up at the polls. So how are the groups in the Democratic Party right now is very much in opposition to Amendment 1, the League of Women Voters, a lot of other, election watchdog groups. So will the addition of Kamala Harris spark an interest for more Democrats to come out to the polls? By the way, potentially defeating Amendment 1 and perhaps even helping Amendment 3 and 4, recreational marijuana and making constitutionally protecting abortion rights in Florida.
And I think regardless of the endorsements or where all this falls, I think that the onus falls on us to make sure that we vet each of these candidates. We vet the information that we're given, make sure that the information is true, so that when we go to the polls that we are educated voters and know what issues we're voting on.
That's correct. And one of the things which is really interesting is a lot of time people will go in a presidential election and they'll be exclusively looking at top of the ballot, or maybe they'll be looking at Senator Scott versus former Congresswoman Powell. And they'll be making these decisions, and then they get to the amendments and they're not even aware what the amendments are.
And sometimes the amendments are written to confuse, well, they're written so that you don't understand exactly what they're really all about.
One other thing I want to say, Bruce, which is really, really unique for Florida, and it should be something that Floridians should be proud of, okay? We don't have an opportunity at the federal level to engage in this kind of direct democracy. All right. In Florida, we have the privilege of being able to go in on hot button issues, okay? And we have the ability to directly communicate to our legislature or to our governor what our intent is. For us as Floridians to go into that ballot box and not be aware, not be alert to deceptive language, it's really a wasted opportunity for us. You know, whenever we put our hands in the air and they say, oh, we can't get anything done because our elected officials aren't responsive. In Florida, we got the ability to make them responsive. And so this is a real opportunity. If you're somebody out there and you're like, no, I don't want my school board to be partisan, go and vote no against Amendment 1. Conversely, if you're somebody who's like, you know what, I think it would make it easier for me to know how to vote for these races if I could just see the party label behind their names. I disagree, but go vote your conscience. It's your responsibility as a citizen to be aware of what that language means and then to go act.
And that's the reason for this discourse here. That's the reason we're talking about this, so that when you go to the polls, you understand what's going on, the pros and the cons, what the proponents and the opponents say, so that you are an educated voter here. In a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, the governor said the candidates he selected had, quote, pledged to serve with a focus on student success, parental rights, as I said. Daniel, parental rights is a dicey topic. It is sharply partisan in itself.
So, Bruce, let me just add a little bit of a personal anecdote for you. When I went to high school, I graduated in Pennsylvania from a very, very small evangelical Christian high school. We were taught with a textbook series what came out of Bob Jones University. It was very, very Christian focused. It was very, very much focused on our role as a Christian, as a citizen, okay? That was a choice that my parents made to send me to that school, okay? I would say for anybody who wants to make public schools in Florida into that kind of model, I would object to that. Despite the fact that I appreciated my education as a child, there is a role for parochial or private education with Christian morals within a Christian high school system. Public education in the United States, by design, is supposed to be non-religious, non-political. We are teaching kids values, mathematics, other things, conditions of humanity, how we deal with each other, how we function with each other. So in my mind, I support private education. I support opportunities for private education and Christian education, Montessori schools, whatever you want to choose for your child. But when that becomes, and that philosophy begins to infringe on our traditional public school system, that's where I object, because I think that parents should be able to expect a quality public education. If I were a Muslim family, if I was a family who was completely a-religious, non-denominational or atheist, all right? Your child has an opportunity just to go to school to learn about what they should be learning about in school. So I would object to that kind of logic. But, again, you think about what the governor's done. I'm somebody who on a regular basis, I'm involved with teaching students to get ready for the Florida Civic Literacy Test, Florida Civic Literacy exam. So basically, when you get out of Duval County High School, or if you graduate from a two-year degree, you have to be able to demonstrate basic competency in government and American history. That sounds lovely. Where did Governor DeSantis turn to develop the questions for this test? He went to the ultra-religious Hillsdale College in Michigan. Now, he could have found faculty who are both left, right, centrist in the state of Florida, at Florida institutions to help him develop this test, rather than obviously going and pandering to the religious right, a very, very conservative college in Michigan like Hillsdale, in order to develop the test. So there's a whole wide array. This is not this idea of not having these elections be, or having party labels on the back. This is just one of a many, many, many series of a very, very deep long-term strategy, ideological progression by the governor and by Republicans in Florida. And by the way, if you're a Republican in Florida, you may not mind that. You may think that this is just getting back to what education was 50 or 60 years ago, okay? But we need to recognize what is going on. This is an ideological shift within our public school system to change the nature of our public schools.
And that's why you vote the way you do. Look, it may be a favorite talking point of conservative candidates, but how frequently do the issues arise in the classroom, which is something you've got to take into consideration?
Issues related to what specifically?
Issues related to the things that Ron DeSantis is talking about, that he wants to make this a partisan race, that some of the school board members that he's endorsing are talking about, that he makes issues of parental rights.
Yeah, well, I would say at least, you know, in my classroom, my approach is very, very much like the conversation we've just had. As I've said, like my goal as an educator has always been, I'm not going to tell students how to think. I'm going to help them with their thinking and help them with their skills. But I mean, if you're somebody who doesn't share my political views in the classroom, then that's your right. You're going to get an A at the end of the day as long as you're demonstrating and you're actually doing the work. But I would say, I mean, these issues are discussed. I mean, a lot of these issues are brought up. A lot of people ask me, you know, why do we have to take this forward?
Yeah. Is there an activist agenda in schools?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think so.
Okay, well, Ron DeSantis seems to think so.
Well, I mean, listen, there's going to be professors at the collegiate level. There are certainly colleagues of mine who do not hide their political leanings. I do not hide my political leanings. I think that where the exception could be taken by the Republican governor, by the way, or a Democratic governor, is if your child is somehow being impacted in the classroom because they are being unfairly graded or they are expected to parrot whatever the political views and opinions are of their faculty. This does happen.
But it doesn't happen in public schools, in you know, elementary schools and middle schools.
Well, I wouldn't say, certainly at the second or third grade level, no. But we shouldn't be so naive to think it doesn't happen in the high school or in the post-secondary or secondary level, because it certainly does happen.
But you're not voting for school board members who are going to influence what happens in the college level, so.
No, and by the way, at the end of the day, the school board members have the ability, especially at the secondary level, to select what curriculum is being used. Mm-hmm. That's a power that they have. It's not left up to the individual teacher.
All right. In an interview in Jacksonville today, District 3 incumbent Cindy Pearson, who, by the way, is a registered Republican, said she first ran for the school board because the race was nonpartisan, and she said, I don't think our kids should be politicized. In fact, she lost her party support as a result. She refuses to make politics a priority. Are too many other candidates putting politics first?
Well, it depends upon the nature. I mean, obviously, I don't know Ms. Pearson. I don't know what her motivations are. It seems like she is really being altruistic in her statement for why she went into be a school board. But remember, there are a lot of individuals, Bruce, if you look at the nature, you know, Florida has term limits. What we've got a lot of career politicians who just go back and forth from the state house to the state senate to city council to the school board. And obviously, you know, I think if you look at the characteristic, all those other races I just mentioned all have a party identifier behind the name of the individual. But then in order to continue their career in public service, they have to come over to the school board and they drop the letter. So, you know, back to your point and back to where we begin this at, you know, at the very, very beginning with the representative who introduced this legislation. He may not be far off in that sense that people already do know who a lot of these established candidates are. You know, for example, just the late Mayor Tommy Hazouri. Okay, who served as mayor, served on city council, served as council president, served on the school board for a while. We all know Tommy Hazouri was a Democrat. You wouldn't have needed to have a D behind Tommy Hazouri's name because his career as a Democrat here was so long and so established. Okay, but he's an exception to the rule. Somebody who's new, just seeking to run for school board. You know, there's a lot of validity to that. Listen, I didn't want to run. I didn't want to be a Democrat. Didn't want to be a Republican. May I also remind you, and I bring this up all the time, we are living in a state now with 4 million people who are registered no party affiliation. So this is not a one-off. The MPA movement in Florida is growing faster than either one of our political parties. So that may speak to a potential failure for Amendment 1.
MPA, no political affiliation.
No political affiliation, that's right.
All right. All of Duval's GOP-backed candidates have made parental rights a central theme of their campaigns. And I'm talking a lot about parental rights here. Talk with them, and they will tell you that means focusing on academics instead of social, cultural issues in the classroom. I got to wonder out loud, is that mixed messaging?
I don't know. So from my perspective, I don't if you are going to have a holistic education and you're going to get back to those core values and those core elements of education, I don't know how you can train people to live as adults in the world without talking about some of the very issues that these individuals don't want to have talked about. Issues related to class, issues related to race. These are issues that as soon as they get out of
It's life.
It's life. As soon as they get out of the K through 12 system, they're going to be confronted with this. And by the way, I think if you are a parent out there and you're uncomfortable with that, you still have the ability to tell your children differently at home as well. You can explain to them when you sit down with your kids at the dinner table, or you sit down with them and said, "What did you go over in school today?" If the child says something to you that you don't like, you can say, "Well, listen, this is how we feel as a family." That has long been the practice in the United States, that a child may be exposed to something for the first time. And by the way, when we talk about, not to get into the weeds, but when we talk about political socialization, how is it and what is framing how our children thinking about the world that they view? The number one, the primary source, we refer to it as primacy, is the parent, is the individual who raises the child. What's happening now in a lot of these cases is that the children get older and sources of political socialization are entering their life that may not agree with their parent. Okay, that is where a lot of this friction is taking place. So my advice would be is rather than changing the nature of public education, become more proactive as a parent. You know, tell your child why it is that this is the way we feel about this particular issue as a family, okay? And if you're really uncomfortable, there used to be a thing, I don't know if this exists anymore, called a parent-teacher conference, where people weren't screaming at a school board meeting, but you could actually go in and talk to the teacher and say, "I'm really interested in why you told Katie this," you know. What was the origin point behind that? And then you work it out with the student, or you work it out with the teacher at one of these conferences. So I just don't think that a foundational change to our public education system is really necessary to deal with these issues.
So,
and by the way, at the end of the day, if you're still uncomfortable, we have a robust charter system in here. You could send your child to a charter school. You could send your child to a religious charter school, and you could get them the kind of education that you want outside of our public institutions. What is the onus or the impetus to want to tinker with traditional public schools that many of us don't have a problem with?
So I grew up in a public school, and once we got past the fundamentals, the ABCs and mathematics and things, I remember I had a social studies teacher, and when they were teaching us about debate, she would sit down and she would say, "Okay, we're going to talk about a particular issue," and she would get into, what do you believe or what have your parents talked to you about? And then she would ask us to take the other side of the debate, and we'd go, "Why?" And she says, "Because I want to teach you, number one, how to research, and number two, how to learn to become acceptable of other ideologies, and how to become independent thinkers, and how to agree to disagree in an agreeable way." And that in itself was a lesson, which I don't think society has anymore.
No, and part of it is that deep polarization that we've talked about in our society. But getting an appreciation for different views is part of the entire education process,
Which is lost.
Which is really, really lost. I mean, there are a lot of things anymore that aren't taught in schools. But I would just go back and I would say this again. There are so many other options for parents out there. If you are somebody who's very, very conservative, if you're worried about a lot of the issues that you don't want your child to be taught in schools, there are very, very affordable options that you can remove your child from the public school. Tons. I'm a product of one, that my parents made that decision. But you don't have to get in and you don't have to foundationally change the public education system in the United States. One of the last things I wanted to say, too, that it was kind of skipped over, Thomas Jefferson, framer, obviously the author of the Declaration of Independence, a small committee of people, he believed that you couldn't actually have real democracy without an educated public. And that if you allowed people who were uneducated to participate in democracy, that the republic would fall. Okay, so where are we at today if we're not developing a holistic child, to your point, who can listen to one side of an issue, another side of an issue, respect the individual they disagree with, and by the way, stay firm to their own true beliefs. That's all part of the educational process.
Maybe even a third side of the issue. And the bottom line is, and I'll repeat this at the end of the show, be involved with your kids. Know what's going on with them and have a discussion with them. Listen to them, and then there won't be as many problems as we have in society. When Pass to the Polls continues, the origins of this divisive political argument. Will people be pressured to vote by party affiliation? And a look at the fundamental question, will passing Amendment 1 lead to political wars, and at what cost? And really, what is best for our kids? That and more when Path to the Polls continues. Welcome back to Path to the Polls. Bruce Hamilton with political analyst Daniel Cronrath, who also happens to be an educator, talking about Amendment 1 on the November ballot. The question, should school board races remain nonpartisan? Daniel, opponents of the measure say they worry that if passed, it will further politicize education. They argue without school board elections, there can be a healthy debate and healthy discussion, that with its implementation, people will be pressured to vote based on party affiliation. Is that kind of pressure going to come to bear?
Well, of course it will. There's no question. You know, the nature of our politics right now is very, very partisan, as we said in the first segment. You know, a lot of people are conditioned to vote on party line, and they won't deviate from party line. Now, does that apply to every Floridian? No, it doesn't. Certainly the 4 million Floridians who are registered MPA don't have to worry about that kind of thing. But let's also talk about this, Bruce, and this is something else which is very interesting, a point we didn't get into. If we put a party label behind these races, and if we actually have a partisan primary for our school board races, we will have 4 million Floridians registered NPA who then become disenfranchised in participating in that primary because they won't be allowed to participate in the primary of either one of the political parties. So one has to ask themselves the question, is that also an aim of this? Is if you want to vote in your local school board race in the primary and you're now a registered NPA, will this force you to come back to either one of the two political parties, which would be definitely a goal of both of the political parties, in order to break up that NPA block and then to get those individuals who are an NPA for any reason back into one of the two establishment parties? That will be another consequence of this. Or will those people who are NPA, Bruce, who want to be NPA for a reason, they don't completely identify with either political party, will they just sit on their hands and then not show up to vote for critical school board primaries? That's the other consequence of doing it this way.
So this became really more interesting during COVID, and proponents have a very different argument. They say during the COVID pandemic, divisive, politicized school board conflicts began. Why? Because parents all of a sudden had a new access to see what their children were learning in virtual classes. And some lawmakers argued many parents were, quote, outraged by what they saw as a clash between values taught in school and the values they were teaching their children at home. And they see this, Amendment 1, as an effort to choose candidates better aligned with their values. And maybe the more obvious question becomes, will a lot of people just go to the polls and vote along the party lines, which we've already questioned? Will keeping school boards nonpartisan allow for more balance? What allows for true representation of families here?
Well, it's an interesting point that you raise, and I'll share an anecdote. But during COVID, a lot of institutions here in Florida went to some form of streaming the classroom presentation. We refer to it as live online in some institutions, or whatever you want to refer to it. But it was basically using tools like Zoom and WebEx and other things to deliver the classroom experience synchronously, I may add, you know, at a given time of day. But, you know, the professor or the teacher would appear on the camera, and then the student would be at the other end, and you could see the student, and they would be interacting through discussions and things like that. You know, but Bruce, to your point, there were times that the student would turn on their camera to speak, and I would notice a family of 7 people sitting in the living room listening to my lecture while they were in there. So your point about families being exposed to the curriculum, and yes, this isn't to imply that parents weren't involved in their children's lives. Of course, you know, left-leaning parents, conservative parents, of course, they're involved with their kids' lives. But it was the first time that they were ever exposed to the actual classroom.
They viewed things through a different lens.
Through a totally different lens, and they got to actually see what their children were being taught. So this comes back again when we talk about the political socialization process. School and after-school groups are the second way, typically in the development of a child, that they are politically socialized. Their number one form of socialization is their parents. And when a lot of their parents are confronted with views that they don't share with the ways that they want to raise their child, then there's going to be pushback, okay? You know, this isn't necessarily going to be something on the right. There are a lot of parents who are very much supporters of the LGBTQ community, who raise their child. They're very, very proud of Pride Month. They're very, very much engaged. And then they'll go to a school or they'll be in an online classroom and they find out that their teacher doesn't share those views. So this doesn't necessarily flow one way. I mean, this can certainly flow the other way as well. But I think what we have to do at the end of the day is we have to have, as we mentioned, a constructive dialogue. If your child is exposed to something in the classroom, or even if your child is exposed to something at college and they come home and tell you over the break and be like, I had this crazy professor and he was telling me about Karl Marx. Then the family could say, well, listen, you're getting a great education. Here's what I'd like to tell you about Karl Marx. Just remember this, that it doesn't jive with what we've been taught in the United States. We're a capitalist society, blah, blah, blah. You get the idea of the entire dynamic of the conversation, and this is what education is supposed to do. It's supposed to expose you to other views, but I certainly do understand why COVID had that impact, why it exposed a lot of parents. But again, I think it's beyond just the right, I think it's both the left and the right who probably saw things both that they weren't aware of what was going on in their child's school.
But I think it also helps kids understand that the world is not black and white.
Sure. Well, I think.
But some parents don't understand that.
Bruce, can I be frank? I think our kids already know that. Okay.
Sometimes I think our kids are better educated than some of their parents.
Well, listen. Every generation of school child in the United States is different. Okay. The classrooms are more diverse. We're becoming more accepting of people with different views. As immigration increases in the United States, we're getting people from different races, different sexual orientation. All of these things are taking place. And if you are somebody who is a baby boomer or older, if you're somebody who's in their 70s or 80s and you're still participating, that represents an enormous societal change from when you grew up. And there's going to be a lot of questioning, like, what's happened to my America? Okay. Well, you know what? I would suggest that if you're 80 years old and you look back when you were 20, your grandparents were saying the exact same thing. What is happening to my America? This isn't new. It's just the evolution of our society. And every generation of kid is a lot more, prepared to deal with that than, say, the older generation. You do a pretty good job, Bruce, for being in the older generation.
You and I are going to talk after this.
Okay, that's good.
State Senator Rosalind Osgood said that we have to focus on education. We don't need political wars in our school boards. Do you worry that passing Amendment 1 might lead to political wars? I mean, we've got them now in some corners.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will. I think the biggest thing which is going to be really interesting is, even though now we already spend a ton of money on school board races, what happens if they were to become political? Can you imagine the amount of cash, okay, which is going to be dumped into a school board race? It really also begs the question, and I'm sorry I've lost track.
Cash that could be used in better corners.
So I apologize, I don't have give or take a few $1,000s. I think our school board officials in Duval County make $45,000. Why would somebody who's going to make that kind of salary as a part-time job, even though it's really full-time work, why would they be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on that race, Bruce? It really gives you an idea of what's going to happen relative to the partisanship of this, that political parties are going to be dumping. We can make the same thing right now with the race which is going on in St. Johns County between Shore and Leak for the state Senate. These guys have dumped millions of dollars of ads into this race for part-time state Senate seats in Florida.
Couldn't we do something to close the gap of $1.4 billion that Duval County has to better education instead of wasting the money on political wars?
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. Yeah.
I'll just leave that. All right. The most important question of all, and you as a teacher are probably well qualified to provide some insight here. What's best for our kids, the students? And I, as a parent, that's the most important question to me.
So for me, my answer would be this, and I kind of already alluded to this. I think that maintaining a public school system, a K-12 system, which provides parents with the options that they need. If you are somebody who is more conservative ideologically and you would like your child to attend a solid Christian school with conservative values, I believe that option could be available to you either through a charter school or if you're somebody who's lower income, through tuition assistance to attend that kind of school if you qualify, okay? I don't think that advocating for that, however, means that we should go after our traditional public school system and rip it down. Everybody, especially ages K through 5, Bruce, everybody should be able to have access to a quality, and let me be clear about this, a quality walk-to elementary school within their neighborhood, or a short school bus ride to. Everybody deserves to have access to that. Everybody deserves to be able to go there. Why? Because we do public education, Bruce, so that we can create that ladder of success, that even if a child grows up lower income, they have an opportunity to move to the middle class. They have an opportunity to move to the upper middle class. Whatever their particular gifts and graces and skills may be, they have that ability to move up. So I think that we need to have a robust system. I personally think that we have invested too much in charters at this point, in the charter school system. I have mixed feelings about a school voucher system, and this is really difficult for me because when I look at individuals who are going to a public school, maybe are failing D, a C or a D or a perennial F school in Duval County, or they go up and down and they slightly improve. While I oppose vouchers systematically in terms of their use, it's very hard to look at, just as a hypothetical, a single mom trying to do the best she can for her kid and knowing that her kid is being failed by her local public school and deny her a voucher or the opportunity to send her child to a public school. It's a very, very difficult issue, and it's one which is difficult to grapple with. Again, I think that this is, however, to put kind of a spin or a closing note on this, I think that's why these issues are best handled in nonpartisan school races, not in partisan school races. I think that every single school district, that people without a party label should be looking at these issues, and Bruce, solving these issues in a way which is best for our children, not which is best for either one of our political parties.
And what's best for our children, and I'm going to get on my bully pulpit here, and it's got nothing to do with amendment, or maybe it does. Instead of spending this money on politics, we need to pay our teachers better. We need to recruit the very best for our teachers, because people aren't going into the profession anymore because it's those teachers who will help mold our children's lives, make sure that they've got the resources that they need. They don't have to go into their pockets because they can't afford it. They don't have the tools that they need to teach our kids. Enrollment is declining in Duval County schools. We've heard about school closures and things like that. We need to make sure that our kids are prepared for the future, and I'll leave it at that. And parents, we have an obligation, no matter what is going on in our lives, no matter how busy we are, to sit down and listen to our kids. Sometimes we just yap too much. Know what our kids are doing.
Yeah, and then the last thing I would say, too, and this is very, very big in the education community right now, which is, I think, will gravitate towards people of both political parties. I don't know about when you were a kid, but certainly when I was a kid, I had a lot of time to free play. Just to play, just to use my imagination. When you look at the average child today and you look at how scripted their lives are with a longer school year, after school programs, organized sports or organized activities that they're participating in. You know, one of the things we know is that children who are allowed to use their imaginations, Bruce, perform better academically. So while we're restricting them and we're putting them in these greater confines and we see their test scores reduce, it's because they're not allowed to use their imaginations any longer. They're not allowed to actually just play and become the people that they are. So I think that's something that you're going to see in the decades to come. I think that you will eventually see a bipartisan embrace of this, of getting back. If you really want to get back to the way education was, we need to start having longer recesses again. We need to actually have an opportunity for kids to be outside and enjoy themselves, so that when they come in, they're replenished and that their minds are ready to learn.
Yeah, and I grew up in an environment where we didn't have the distractions that we did today, and we had two rules at home. It was, you know, Dad, don't make me ask if you did your homework. And number two, we're all going to sit down, we're going to have dinner together, and we're going to talk. We're going to find out what's going on in our day.
But you know what, and this is something you and I, this is when we're both going to show our age together. The other thing that we have to do, if we roll back the clock and we say what's changed in education, screen time. Okay,
that's what I was talking about. We didn't have that's what I meant by distraction.
Listen, I'm on my phone all the time. You and I text message. We know that this is a reality of life, but really creating an environment where we're all doing better, whether you're an adult, whether you're a parent of a child, and we're saying, listen, let's put the screens down just a little more often. Let's get back to actually talking to people, having that dinner table conversation. My goodness, let's just take a neighborhood walk and leave our technology at home. You know. You see somebody on their front porch, if you live in a neighborhood which is dense, say hi to your neighbor and get back and have like kind of those personal communications. And I think that, you know, these are, by the way, that costs nothing. It costs nothing to do that. Anyway, I think we kind of share that sentiment.
Yeah, okay. You and I will talk about the old guy comment coming up. Thanks for watching us on Path to the Polls. As you know, there's an encore presentation at 7, and you can watch this streaming on demand anytime you would like on the News4Jax YouTube channel or news4jax.com. And we'd always love to hear from you. You can email me here at the station. Hope you have a great day. And remember, our kids are our most precious resource. Thank you.
See why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.